I'm Christina.
And I'm Matt.
And this is New Ways Podcast. Today our guest is founder of Letters Left Said and director of Pipe Dream Industries. She's a remarkable individual who cares deeply about helping people on their grieving journey. Christine Cameron, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Dude, we're so excited to have you because this has been a long time coming. And having you come on our podcast. And, for our viewers, this is something that's so big for me personally, having you on, because we've had almost 3 years of friendship now. And it's because of a place called Experience Camps, which is one of the reasons that we're actually here today to kind of talk about sort of your journey and also your experiences. And then because of that, now you have created a product to help people with, their grieving journey, which has just been so incredible to see. And so I would love for us to just kind of dive into that and just kind of share a little bit of the story and like why you're here and what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, happy to. I think grief is such an important topic and everyone grieves differently. It never goes away on its own. And so I feel like as we talk about it, grief should be a constant conversation, not to be always doom and gloom, but something that we reflect on, because everyone around us, there's someone that they love that they've either lost or maybe they've lost touch with. These are all part of the same equation of the journey of grief.
Yeah.
So with myself specifically, I grew up in an immigrant family, Vietnamese, Chinese, and when my parents escaped Vietnam after the war, lots of series of tragic events had happened to my mom. She were millionaires, and then they became literally from riches to rags in a matter of seconds, And so they didn't have their home. They moved into a small hut, and they tried to survive. And so my mom was 8, and she spent 10 years of her life trying to save money with her siblings and her mom to bail my grandfather out. And the reason why I talk about this is because I really believe that my mom's mentality of resilience and focus on getting out of such a difficult circumstance at a young age really showed up for me as an adult, and especially at the time of being in America itself. It's such a place where there is such mobility socially, mobility income-wise, mobility to just be and evolve as a human and not like this boxed in character that you have to be. And so with her, they escaped from Vietnam to Houston. My mom's Canadian, actually, but anyway, long story. But essentially, she went to Canada, then met my dad in Houston, and was an entrepreneur. And she wasn't around. Actually, my mom and dad both were working so much to try to survive and keep the kids alive that honestly, I've had an absent dad and an absent mom for a long time. And people don't realize this, but it's a choice we make to categorize our parents as either the ones that did something to us, or you really can empathize with their experience. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, it takes a lot of work, because no doubt it really takes the bit of that love away. You didn't grow up with that love, so you have to figure out how to nurture and create love for yourself while they're absent. And then when they are back in the picture, when they're doing well or a little bit better, it creates this richer tapestry when you know that they're getting older. And when you get older, that grief grows, because even though they're still there, you're seeing that evolution of them getting older and more sentimental, and you start to grieve the fact that you were a child and you wish you had that love.
Yeah.
And now you're having that love, and it's finally coming together for you. Or sometimes people don't get it at all, and so you'll always have that gap for a long time. And so when my dad had passed away 3 years ago, I wasn't close to him maybe until maybe 8 years ago. It's crazy though, because my grief now is so clear, because I wish I had more time earlier on to have a proper relationship with my dad sooner, the way we had it at the end of his life. And so when he suddenly passed, he was only 63. And he was just going on a walk one day with the family dog, and he had just fallen over, and they couldn't identify his body. And so it was just this really difficult situation of not knowing. Like it's like all of a sudden things were normal and then things aren't. And I couldn't stop like honestly screaming. Like it was just so, I had the call from the hospital. I was in emergency contact. And it's really stuck with me, these like the suddenness of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes we don't remember like to cherish what we have while we have it. And like it's important then to talk about it so that we remember that we should be really thankful for what we have.
Yeah. Well, that's such an amazing story. Let me say that. And I'm so sorry about your father, especially I know when things come suddenly, that can be a huge shock because I mean, like grief is grief, losing somebody, pain is pain. But out of nowhere, I can't even imagine because you do have those people who are like, I kind of saw it coming. And it was like the grieving process actually might start a little sooner when you know that the life is coming to an end. But out of nowhere, I can see where it could be definitely a shock.
Like a slow burn.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus a sudden one. Yeah.
Yeah. And let me ask you, how did you initially react to your father's passing and start grieving as soon as you heard that?
I actually didn't get a chance to grieve for about a year because my mom was very close to my dad and they spent a lot of time together. And so her grief really encompassed almost all of mine. She got very mentally sick. She's very depressed to the point of catatonia. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Catatonia is a state where you're almost like zombie light. So where all the lights are on in the house, but no one is actually there. That's how I would describe it. And so she couldn't really speak. She was really focused on like a couple of motor functions. So like wanting to always run away back to her bed and not wanting to talk, speak. She attempted suicide a few times. And it was a really hard time that year. So I was just so eaten alive by her grief that I couldn't even think in my head, even though it was so sad and parts of me just thought in my head like, oh, this is like such a terrible thing to have happened. I didn't take the time for myself and I just compartmentalized it and I would cry and it would just be so intense that I would like, because responsibility, sometimes it allows you to have this like purpose for a long time. And so I was just sustaining off of that. And that's why Matt and me meeting was very meaningful because it was during a time of experience camps where it was the first time I could be around other people who are grieving and also healthily grieving because there are counselors there that are true therapists like Matt and that are very understanding about how dark this process is. And grief, very oddly, is a lot better experience with someone else than alone. But many people who are grieving, they don't want to see other people. And so it's that uncomfortable space of when I'm ready to start grieving with another person or just even expressing it, you actually feel a little bit better. Because grief is not a bad thing. It's actually just your way of showing that love and that light within yourself for someone else. But it just looks like your shadow side of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so it was very meaningful to meet you then. And my mom is now better. She gets treatments every month. It's called ECT. And so they essentially, the hospitals create a like artificial seizure that turns on her nerves and allows for her to respond.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, to those currents. And as a result, she can actually feel emotions again. It's pretty intense. Yeah. It's with its own side effects, but for some people it's not very good, but for other people it's been life-changing. So definitely like a intense therapy.
And I was gonna say, like, I mean, and not to go too much into detail because I'm very protective of, your stories and things that obviously like you shared with me. And I'll never forget that first year when you talked about your experiences and like the things you had gone through. But to me, meeting you for the first time and seeing how insanely resilient you were, it was something that was so incredible to me. It was something that's like one of the things that drew me to you as a person. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like Christine's someone I have to be friends with, because you had just such this incredible light about you, but in a way that you held this space so well. And I think that was something too that I actually would love to, you and I have talked about, but it's something I would love to talk to you about too, just with for our viewers and people, is that how do you hold that space for yourself while still being, so resilient through like a very traumatic experience?
That's an interesting one. I think it varies per person, which I think many people would say. But for me specifically, what grinds me the most is trying to remind myself that this is a universal feeling. Like we're
Yeah.
in a collective cloth of life. And so when we think that we have a very unique and specific one, yes, it's unique, but it's still a shared experience in some way. And I've always been a helping type though. And so for also being able to say, okay, I know this now, how can I help? It allows me to process at the same time, because it lets me like kind of take away from like that layer of being like, I'm like a third party observer of myself when I get to talk to someone else.
Yeah.
Because like I will look at someone's experience and they're talking about it, then I'll like be looking at them objectively, and then I'll try to apply that same exact principle to myself and be like, okay, as a third party person, like how would you respond to yourself? And that's worked out really well for me. Just having that, I'm always trying to step back, like that perception shift. I try it often and actively, because if not, I do think I would tend to spiral. And, there are times for spiraling. I'm not like perfect, but I definitely am the type to just go, actually step back a little bit and like take a look at what's happening for your friend here. And actually, can you use the same statements you helped encourage your friend on for myself, and like actively that day? So it's not like some sort of situation of like, oh, I'll save that for next time. I'll actually remember and do it like at the time of. And so that works for me.
So doing what you preach in a way.
100%.
I love that so much. Because I even so many times with clients, I'll say something to them and be like, oh my gosh, I needed actually that reminder in my own life. It's crazy how you're so right. We all go through very different, but at the same time, similar things in life. And the only thing, we talk about this all the time, the only thing consistent in life is that things are constantly like dying and being reborn and changing. That's the one thing that like as humans, we're always fighting things, right? We're always fighting age, circumstance, situation. But that's the one thing we honestly can't control.
Absolutely.
Is that things are constantly like dying and being reborn. And like eventually nothing's permanent in this world.
Yeah.
And hearing your original story too about what's going on with your mom, it kind of sounds like to me, you almost lost both parents at once.
Oh, yes. That's such a beautiful way to put it. That's exactly how it felt.
Yeah.
And I honestly was worried that I wouldn't have two parents by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I was mourning and readying myself in the case of the worst case scenario, despite mitigating it actively. And that, it's like weird, but I would say having that experience of, oh, my mom is about to potentially do this too, it made it easier to handle some of the burden of having my dad suddenly pass, because I was like, oh, wow, this is like, would be terrible versus terrible. And I was just prepping, and that helped me cope. And I think that's a bit unhealthy, to be honest with you, but the circumstances allowed for it to be just better. Like it made it better.
Well, it's a good way to look at it. Like it allowed you to survive in a sense and be resilient. Grief and loss is not linear. Everyone's like, oh, this might not be healthy. This is healthy. But we all are surviving to the best of the ability, the way that we know how. And even because I'm from Chicago and my mom very much has the Chicago mindset where it's like, you're tough. Like we just push through it, we get through it. And that served me in so many cases where if I was a little bit weaker, it might not have turned out that well. If you weren't able to be there for your mother, who knows what would have happened. But then I love how you said you went to experience camps then and allowed yourself to kind of open up to these people, because there's a time and a place to be resilient, and then there's a time and a place to heal.
Absolutely.
So how did you decide to kind of get involved in experience camps?
I got really lucky. A gal hadn't heard that my dad had passed and mentioned it to me and said, hey, like, there is a camp for folks who have lost a primary caregiver or sibling. And I definitely, in general, always process by helping other people. That's just how I am as my mode of function. And so I was like, oh, this is perfect. I didn't think of it as them helping me, but I was like, if I help them, maybe I'll feel a little better that I can actually do something positive, because it felt so endless with my mom that anything I was doing wasn't going to work. And like, they always say like, be curious, like a child. And the only way you can be curious like a child is actually sometimes spending time with kids
Yeah.
and really taking in that frame of thought that they have. And so I was like, okay, that's perfect. It's with kids. So I learned something from them and they'll teach me how they've coped, because that's way, way hard. I mean, they're young, so they haven't had time to even develop emotional tooling.
But that's kind of beautiful too, though. I love how children are so emotionally just vulnerable.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of adults can learn from that, is like, let those emotions come out. Yes. But please continue.
And that's my exact device, actually. I have a second device where I always go, can I just instill being a little bit like a child in this, like, and have that curiosity still, especially with hard stuff, like things that I'm like, oh, I really don't feel like doing that. But I'm like, actually, can I just like apply that curiosity mindset to that and soften my gaze, if that makes sense, at the situation? Yeah. And then it helps me like wrangle myself into like, okay, maybe I can do this. Oh, it's not too difficult, or making it more bite-sized so that I can digest it. And that's what I did with my grief. Like with these kids, seeing them live and like the way they talk about their parents or the siblings and their love for them and their love for each other, actually, because they have become such good friends. It was like, okay, I can see where I can use this in my life too. And that's how I'm inspired by these kids. The people say, oh, that's so inspirational. But it's like, no, I like truly was inspired. Like I instill like that feeling I got from it all the time. Just like, I even meditate sometimes on that feeling of like respect for children and their open-mindedness towards the most difficult things in life. Because that's the only way they know how to do it. And we're like this. We're still children. Yeah.
And I just think one thing that was really fascinating about even when I went, it was just like discovering the elasticity of these kids' brains and through like the trauma and grief that they had been through, but then hearing their stories and they're like, yeah, I lost my dad to suicide, or, I lost my mom to cancer, or, and then you're like, man, these things are things that like I've gone through, or things that like and then I was like, these kids handled it like so remarkably, or like things that, and I think that's also was just so insane to like see that kids went through like similar things that you either would go through personally, or that you had friends go through, or that you were therapizing people back at home that they were going through. And then they were teaching you new things about how they like coped with their things, and they would talk about what made them happy. And it was one of the most, and it literally, and their motto is, this experience camps is the best week ever.
Absolutely.
It is?
It is. Yeah. That's their motto. It's the best week ever. Yeah. And it's, Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Experience Camps provides a free week for anyone who's lost a parent or a sibling. And as a result, they get to like have fun activities. And then every day there's like a little window for clinical activities to allow them to talk about their grief and some of the more difficult portions of their experience. And the kids share together and it's very thoughtfully made, because there's always a therapist paired up with a bunk, and it is the best week ever, because you can do all the good stuff and then also the hard stuff too. And it's like such a joyous thing. Like the best conversations you have with someone is a deep one.
Yeah.
Not one that's like about the weather the entire week,
That's such a beautiful mix. It's like bringing your heartbreak with all the happiness in the world. It just, if anything, it makes you like appreciate the happier things more, while also being able to heal yourself as well.
Yeah. Yes. That dichotomy, it makes the world so sweet.
It does.
Yeah.
So kind of share I'm so intrigued, honestly, after hearing about experience camps. I'm kind of like, I want to like volunteer and go there, because it just seems there is something about the look on a child's face, right? When they just like light up because of something, or the way they handle things, you're like, how are you so wise and so young?
Absolutely.
And so pure. And it just sounds like such an amazing thing for, once again, the children and the adults who participate. But take me through kind of like a week there. How do you help these kids who are dealing with grief? Like, is there a process? Do you guys have tools? Are there activities?
Yeah. So you and I had separate roles.
Yes. So different roles.
I'm
a counselor.
Yep. And then I was a grief specialist.
Yes.
For those kids. And grief specialists are licensed or pre-licensed therapists or social workers. Anyone within the mental health space that has a master's can qualify as a grief specialist, and you have to have, obviously the qualifications and stuff. But the thing is like that. So I don't know, like how, like, do you want, like, cause I would say like immediately I'm like, wait, how did my day go?
You're
oh
like,
my gosh.
how does they all
So it's
blend
like
into
a crazy
one?
rush because you're there with the kids or with other counselors the entire week,
Yeah.
nonstop. So it's about 6 to 7 days.
Yeah.
And every day is an activity. It's just like summer camp. So if you were to have a sleepaway camp that was also summer camp activities the entire time.
Yeah.
But then imagine like a wedge of a morning time clinical activity and a nighttime wedge of like a fire around the fire conversation.
Okay.
That's kind of how it went every day. And they would have different activities from like carnival day to pool to lake to like jet skiing to like all this stuff depending on what camp you're at.
Mhm.
And so the kids get to just literally enjoy your life and you're just supervising them. You don't want them to get hurt or anything like that.
Mhm.
And from there, the most meaningful parts is like you don't have to have lost a parent or anything to have gone. You do it out of the goodness of your heart,
Yeah.
right? So for counselors, they get a really beautiful view of just being supportive. Because sometimes kids don't need advice. Kids
I
actually
feel like they don't a lot of times. They just
Yeah.
need to be heard and
Yeah.
nurtured and reassured that regardless of the bad things, everything's going to be okay. Because let's be
Absolutely.
honest.
And that's actually in our training. It's talking about, it's
Yeah.
like, we're not like experience camp is not a place to get advice. Like it's truly just to be heard and
Yeah.
listen and hear each other's stories. And, you get the occasional kid that says, how, what are some things that I can do to like help myself with this? Or I had a kid that actually went into detail with me about the loss of a parent who passed away from suicide. And so it's just like when you ask, then you can ask questions like that and you're like, hey, I may not know the answers, but I think someone else, might back home or something. Like you can like often like direct it back to say, hey, do you have a therapist at home or do you have someone to talk to? Is really big.
But
It's
I
like,
think that's so beautiful at the same time, though, because thankfully, I know it'll happen one day. I haven't lost anybody that close to me besides my grandparents at a very young age. And I do remember at a very young age, since I had such a good, my cousins were around, like all the aunts and uncles for the death of the grandparents. It was actually very easy. And I still had like my mom and my dad there, my sisters, like the community that we had made losing them, I feel like, a lot easier. And just like anything in the world, you said the kid came up to you.
Yeah.
I feel like it's nice just to support people through the grieving process and anything in life. But a lot of times when you try to give them a perspective or guidelines or tools, it's met with rejection. But when somebody genuinely comes up to you and just wants advice, it's going to be heard and accepted and probably implemented in the right way versus feeling like I need to do this because this is what people are telling me is right for me.
Mm-hmm. That was okay. Now remembering like a big thing. Okay. So there we go. So I know a big thing that we also talked about too was like how we phrased things.
Yeah.
Were super important. And so they actually talked to us heavily about the fact they say, you can't say like, well, not that you can't, but they refrain from you saying like, I know what you're going through or me too. And the reason why is because we truly will never know what they're going through. And we will never like, we may have lost someone in the same way, but that doesn't mean that we will under the understanding of what
everybody has a different internal dialogue.
Exactly.
Nobody's is the same.
So yeah. So we often go into like, when kids talk to us about something, we can say, wow, that sounds incredibly difficult. I'm sorry you went through that. Like, because you come from this like neutral perspective. So then kids be like, yeah, you're right. It did suck, and then they can, elaborate further on what that meant for them.
They say that it's important to state it as it is. Committing suicide is truly the act. And it is a way to say, this is my experience, but I'm honest about what happened so that I'm not I'm not euphemizing the actual like state of what happened to my parent, my sibling. It's actually the state of like, wow, I lost this person this way, truly. And it's dark. Grief is dark because we lost someone. And there's no need to hide that. Yeah.
Well, I feel like oftentimes sugarcoating things and not being truthful about stuff probably could lead you even down a darker path because you're not then in that way, you're kind of saying your feelings aren't valid.
Totally.
You're kind of saying what happened to you actually didn't happen to you. And that's no way to heal or move on from a situation. It's kind of like you're constantly trying to cover up and still living in the past at the same time.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And that was one of the biggest things that I've even discovered about just grief in general. And I know we can discuss about that. And I had a kid that came up to me and I'll never forget this, year 2. because I've done 3 years there total now. In year 2, I had a kid that came up to me and says, I don't understand how so many people can go through grief, yet no one knows how to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, whoa, yeah, like how, you're right. How can all of us go through these such deep collective experiences,
Right.
but it'd be such a taboo or such a dark or negative thing to talk about, and no one's able to even understand or how to support each other through it. And I think that was something that really has always stuck with me.
Yeah. With grief too, I think there's this mentality of like, oh, people didn't check in with me anymore after 6 months, like or a year, or even 3 months. And although that stuff is true, it may not be in the forefront of someone else's minds. There's so much going on in our lives, and there's so much going on in the world that is very heavy. And every event, every topic weighs heavily differently per person. And so to me, it's really up to us to take in our grief journey as our own, and then find people along the way we can share with, but no one's ever responsible. It's like, it's not a negative thing if someone doesn't check in, because they have their stuff going on. And I'm not a huge fan of how things are going, where it's like, oh, they didn't check in with me, they don't care. But it's actually like, no, yes, your experience was so tough, absolutely. But these folks are grieving on their own things. You don't have to have lost a parent or lost a sibling for your grief to matter more. You can actually stop being in touch with someone you love from high school or in college, and that is grief in itself. And we just don't share it openly because it's just an awkward topic. It becomes this like, oh, I'm making the mood sour, or she's going deep. Oh no. And that's I feel like that's sometimes a reflection on the person. Like, they're not ready to go deep. That's okay. But actually, closing a door on potentially a really thoughtful and meaningful experience of just talking to someone. And I do think that we're more open with these type of griefs, we can become more connected with each other. And as a result of that connection, I do think it would help with some of the polarizations we have lately in our world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And you're 100% right too. I know we've spoken mainly about like losing a loved one or a family member, but there's so many other things of grief. Like, people do grieve even like dying pets, but also old relationships, because when you're so emotionally, it's pretty much anything that you've been emotionally attached to at one point, it leaves you kind of feeling empty.
Absolutely.
A lot of people will like grieve old relationships or like even hometowns, you move away and you miss that. And in regards to your kind of aspect of people not stopped reaching out, like, I'm a firm believer that we are all the main character of our own story. And I feel like when people actually accept that, people will start taking responsibility for their own story and realize also at the same time, though, whatever I do, I'm not in the forefront of anybody else's head. Their life is always going to be more important to them than my life, because that's their life they're living. And also too, when you were saying like this person doesn't show up anymore, the one thing, and I tell you this a lot, I'm like, you need to also give people the opportunity to show up for you.
Right.
Because how are they supposed to know? We don't talk about emotions that much. You're right. How are they supposed to know that you're still hurting? How are they supposed to know that you need their support if you don't ask for it, if you don't tell them?
Right.
Like, just because somebody doesn't call you every single day or check in doesn't mean that they're not going to be there when you need them to be there. So give them that opportunity. I feel like you're right. We just don't talk about our emotions and are trained to bottle them down, thinking people don't care. But I feel like a lot of times people do.
Yeah. And even more addition to that is like, does someone even know what they need? Like, for me, I have a lot of trouble articulating like what I would need from a friend that would make me feel better. So if someone were to just think about it, like, oh, I'm having this really dark experience, instead of immediately blaming someone else for not giving them what they need, I actually would ask that person, like, what are you wanting? Like, what is it that you want and desire? Sometimes it is just like comforting quality time with someone else that they love. Or it could be like, I want you to be showering me with gifts. I don't know. But, it can be really extreme. But then that person has to assess on their own. If they're their own main character, all right, well, you need to communicate then that you need that.
Yeah.
Even if it's extreme, you keep people that will want to stick around, so that's on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like this might just be my basic answer, but I feel like people genuinely just want to feel safe and loved and okay.
Yes.
And you're right, that shows up in so many different ways. And this was a question I wanted to ask both of you actually, because we talk about like being open and honest and these like kind of pure humans in a way where we don't hold back our emotions and we own who we are. Do you think, and this might be a loaded question, do you think children are more able to deal with grief in a healthy way than adults are?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Part of me, honestly, here's the thing, based on what I have seen, yes.
Okay.
Because I think that...
Because I feel like there's something to learn from this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. At its core is that kids haven't experienced the world like adults have. And that's not a blanket statement for all kids, because I believe that everyone's their own person. Everyone's gone through their own thing. But that being said, what I have noticed is kids look at the world differently because they see themselves differently, because the world sees them differently.
Yeah.
But when you're an adult, you see things for as they are, because that's how your lived experience is. It comes back to the elasticity of a child's brain, and the cognitive functioning at its core. It's like all these kids can go through like crazy stuff and then recognize like the next week, be like, all right, I like still gotta go back to school and still, it's just, I'm always just shocked and enamored by some of the things that kids go through, and then turn around like a week later and be like, I had a soccer game after my mom died and it was fine. I was like, okay, like sounds good, but if an adult told me that story, I would be having a lot I'd be like, are you good?
Yeah.
Like, are you going to that soccer game because you're trying to avoid it? Or like, what else is going on? Like, usually there's some deeper stuff. So, but yeah, I don't know. What about your own perspective on that?
We're societally conditioned as adults, right?
Yeah.
You go through life. When people say go through life, it literally means societal conditioning. You're going through what society wants to see from you. And not in all cultures, but most cultures, especially in America, we've been taught to be pleasant.
Yeah.
We're always pleasant. And even if you're not in the mood to talk to someone or don't actually like them, it's not common. We still are quite polite, which is like, it's not a bad thing.
It's kind of like people ask you how you are and your automatic answer is just, I'm good, I'm fine. Even though you're like, I'm dying inside.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, sometimes people say, oh, that's a lot to like share, I'm dying inside. Like that girl just went so deep instead of just giving a lighter answer. And that's considered a negative thing. And honestly, there's a time and place for everything. I get it. Like if you're at a like really fun party and it becomes this like really tough sob story, I mean, I understand.
Yeah.
But in other ways, like if we had an open like medium for just like the way kids do, they just go, I'm upset, and they just throw a tantrum, and they don't always get what they want, but they at least express that feeling of throwing that tantrum. I wish as adults we had an easier way to show throwing a tantrum more out loud. Like this is the same idea with like jealousy and envy. I was just talking to someone, they're like, I don't even know how a girl could feel jealous or envious. Like that obviously shows that they're not like there's something wrong with them. And I remember being so shocked by that statement, because jealousy and envy are actually the reasons why we have that is often because someone has learned to repress what they want out loud. We want something, but we can't tell anyone we want it. So as a result, we have a tendency to show that jealousy and envy is the only way that our body is able to like express to us, like, actually, we want this, but we're too ashamed to admit this out loud to the public or anyone, even myself.
Yeah.
And grief is so similar, or deep talks is very similar. We're craving some larger connection. That's why these silent meditations, breath work, these things have become really popular, because I do think it really brings us back to this base core of us.
Yeah.
And like this, who we are as people existentially, like spiritually. We're spiritual beings, whether or not someone is religious. Like it's just that we're trying to have that experience. And especially on something like New Ways, where we're talking about mental health, all the listeners are craving more and that connection, and children are allowed to express that they need that connection so much sooner than an adult ever would.
Yeah. I just feel like maybe children never lost their connection. As adults, like you were saying, it's like we're trained to, in a way, disconnect
Yeah.
with our internal knowing and emotions and being honest and open. They just never forgot how to be themselves and connect with like that higher self, like higher sense of self.
Absolutely.
But
So
it's true
beautiful,
though.
yeah. And that's why I'm so big too. You mentioned like the meditations and breath works. And I believe, because we were talking briefly before this, you've done a few of them. I've definitely done a few retreats. We're going to get Matt to do a few.
Come on, Matt, let's go.
Oh.
But it's all about like, that's the thing. It's all about sitting with yourself and getting to know yourself again. Because we talk about not letting these emotions out, especially when it comes to like envy and jealousy. Like those emotions are ways to show up and learn for yourself, right?
Absolutely.
Like every time you're envious about something, if you were honest with yourself and said, oh my gosh, I'm feeling not this good feeling, or it's something I'm not supposed to feel, you can be curious and realize, oh, it's because I want this thing. Okay, now how can I get it?
Right.
If it's not a bad thing to want things, because we all do want things, how can I get it in a healthy way instead of bottling it down and just letting it live there and come up whenever it wants to? That's what taking care of yourself is all about, is realizing who you are as a person, letting go of all these repressed emotions, because the body keeps score, the mind keeps score. Everything you don't let out, it has to go somewhere. It stays in you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to come up eventually. So
Definitely.
connecting with yourself allows you to kind of know yourself and release all those things that you've bottled up.
Absolutely.
Kids don't bottle things up.
And it becomes actionable. And then
Yeah.
that action is release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of, things in regard, Christina was talking about, the idea of taking care of yourself. You have, and just to like segue into this, because you have created a product for people now to take care of themselves, but in a way to help with the grieving process.
Yes.
And so I would love for you to talk to us about Letters Left Said.
Oh, yes, my favorite. So I have segued from you like making the products grief specific only because I want it to become a product that the living is obsessed with using for themselves, for their future selves, and for their future families if they want any, or for friends that they want to grow and share their story on. And so Letters Left Said is a legacy building app. So you're building your legacy and other people in your family's legacy by saving the essence of who someone is and what they have gifted you or shared with you over time. So your mom has given you a ring that has been passed down generation to generation. Only she knows that story of the ring. And so she keeps that within her mind. When you get this item, you know a little bit of it, but how cool is it if you were able to have her voice shared and saved with a picture of the ring, so that if you ever wondering what she was thinking or what the story is of the ring is, you have it in a digital archive. And that's what Letters Left Said will do, is that it becomes a family tree for you to say, oh, here are like my things I really value from my families, the stories, all the uniqueness in your family's voices if they're around. And if they aren't, then someone who is very intimate and close to that family member, can they speak to that story, and you can record it, and it's always saved somewhere in an organized manner. And so it becomes legacy building, because if we were to have kids, then those kids can also just go back and listen and replay. Current generation of our AI use, we can actually make a bot do anything and say anything. But no one can get to that point of exact replication of the actual person themselves. And that's the beauty, is like you can have the way your mom tells how fondly she received this ring, about her grandma and the tonage. You can even hear her like just choke up a little bit, that feeling of like, oh wow, like she cares so much. That will be captured in a way that's organized for you at any point in time. And so it's actually a grieving tool, but a tool really for the living, so that your memory lives on, just like how grief does. Grief is our way of having our memory live on.
That's incredible. I love how, because when he was kind of telling me about the app briefly, he was mentioning how you say you're like going through an old relative's house, and like that way you can keep all the memorabilia and like remember how the house looked and the furniture without actually trying to like stuff it into a closet to keep on going back to it. Because things do like over time get worn out. Like we can't keep all the furniture or all the like personal belongings of our loved ones.
Yes.
But this is allowing them to save it in a secure place. You know, it's not going to go away.
Exactly.
Which is amazing because I can't tell you how many times I go through my phone and I'm like, I need more storage. I have to delete all this stuff, or like everything gets lost in the sauce a lot of times.
Yeah.
And now when people are kind of feeling nostalgic, they can go back and reminisce over all the things in life. And I think if anything can help in people's grieving when shared with like children and future generations too, because if anything, it shows it's like, yes, we lost this person, but they still live on.
100%.
And they left so many beautiful things behind, and I can show you right now.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I'll say too, like one of the coolest things that I loved about your app when you and I talked about it was that you discussed about the idea of like being able to sort of have like a community based around it as well. So that when someone say passes away, that they are able to then in turn, like people are able to share their stories of your person, but not in like a very like not in a funeral way or like very like, you know, here's the memory or whatever, but like having a collective memory about like a sweatshirt or a, you know, a ring, or maybe like this one time at the lake, and people being able to share all these stories. And then you would be able to go and put your own story on that with your memory about the person and stuff. So then in return, those who couldn't be there in person to maybe write those memories were able to then write it, you know, behind their phones and be able to, because I think also too is like, I've been to, you know, a few funerals as well where they're like, please write your memory about the person. I'm like, I don't remember. Like,
Yeah,
you know, it's like
it's a lot of pressure.
It's like a lot of pressure,
but
you know.
also,
and then
what are they doing with all those papers too? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like it
I
goes in a
mean-
box in a closet, and it's hard to like pull those out and go through one over another.
And it's on a website that's
Yeah.
archived. It's not active.
Yeah.
And like for my dad, for example, people share so many memories. But for me, going back to that, I don't even remember what the website's called. Like that's actually the problem. It's like going back to that website and seeing all of the stuff. It's not immediate. It's not easy to access. And that's tough. That's really tough. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, so that to me was like groundbreaking. Because I was like, my God, like that solves like
You're like, I don't have to think on the
I
spot
was like, that's
anymore.
an actual like problem solved. I was like, dang,
Well,
you
also
know,
at
and it
funerals
just
too, like putting people on the spot. People are grieving. They're sad. As much as we are like think about the happy things, we should allow loved ones and family members to just sit there and enjoy this moment of being there for the deceased as well as the family, and being in that kind of energy without having to think about, oh, what's the best story I can think of? I want to do them justice about how I feel.
Yeah.
Like they should just be able to be at the funeral in that moment feeling how they feel.
Yeah.
And then later on be like, please remember all the great things this person did. If anything, you're allowing people to go back in and kind of allow their spirit and their memory to live on and write their story in a way.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's a positive thing too,
Yeah.
rather than something that's like, oh, this is like my memory box. It's like, no, this is my memory box. And is the tapestry, you know?
and you get to share it with the world.
Yeah.
Too, which is like the
Which
coolest
is
thing.
and
ever.
it's
How'd you
often
come
around.
up with that?
Okay, so it's a bit of a morbid way
It's
of explaining it,
Yeah.
but I am married to my husband Josh, and so when I was thinking, okay, actually after my dad had passed, I actually kind of freaked out. I was like, oh my gosh, anyone could die at any point in time, all of a sudden, and
It's the truth.
yeah,
It is the truth.
you never know, an accident, a freak accident, anything.
Yeah.
A bad surgery gone wrong, whatever it may be. And so I just thought, oh my word, I don't want to leave this earth without at least letting the people I love or my husband know that I love him. And so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna write, like I did a writing exercise of just like letters to my friends and family that I really want them to know like how much I care about them.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, upon my passing, I'd like these to be distributed is like my idea. And so I did this exercise.
It's like, I feel like they do that in the movies all the time.
Really? I did not know.
You're like it's like your dad or your sister left you a letter that's been sitting in a drawer for 20 years.
Okay, that's actually literally
No,
what
it happens. Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, who's going to distribute these upon my dad? Like my husband can't even find like my socks. Like how am I going to be able to like get him to know that these letters exist and to send it. And so my initial idea was like, hey, how do I take these letters? And then upon their passing, send them out. So like someone could write to this app, and then the app would distribute the letters. And it's still a really good idea. But what happens is that everyone's like, Christine, this is very morbid. So no one's going to want to pick up this app just to like no one has it, or not no one, but not many people have that inclination.
I would. I'm like, tell people you love them every chance that you can get.
But think about it, like setting aside time every single time to do it is a bit much. And so I was like, okay, what's another way we can do it? We give people gifts because we love them, and we want them to have a piece of that story of like why we gave them that gift, especially grandparents. And grandparents and actually children and their grandkids don't have a lot of chances to connect. So I thought this app would be really awesome for grandparents wanting to bond with their kids, and then you just active record while the kid is like, what is this, grandma? And then she can walk through a piece of herself or whatever it is that she during that time.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got that idea.
That's brilliant. I mean, my God, there's so many stories my grandfather would share with me about, growing up in, on the ranch in Montana. And I just was like, man, I wish I could have had those stories recorded. So I think like when I was thinking about it and you talked about it, immediately I was like, oh my God, how hilarious would it be if you could just like write like really funny, quirky things to future people and just to like mess with them. Just like say like really off brand or like off like color things. And you're like, what? Like, anyways, just like it'd be hilarious.
I kind of love that too at the same time though, because like I'm assuming the people on this app, like you have a password and a username and stuff, are going to be people who probably know you.
Yes.
And if anything, it's just, how they always, like, the living always joke with, like, people. They're like, I'm going to haunt you when I'm dead. If anything, I'm sorry.
That's actually perfect, literally. It's like a little cameo from Matt. Or Easter egg from Matt.
Right?
Yeah, we were just talking about reminiscing over old videos. Dude, some of the stuff that I probably said on there, people would be laughing.
I would make people go on like a fake treasure hunt and be like, here's 50 grand in the backyard. It's under the third rock on the left. Go find it.
App, though. There we go.
I know.
That's so funny. What a great idea.
Honestly, though, like, why not? I'm sure people after that, they'd be like, oh, he's still here, even though he's not here. He's still messing with us.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing.
Totally. Oh my God, it's so good. So, it's actually.
I will say too, so like, are you in development with this? Are you done in the development phase?
We're currently in the development phase. As you know, with startups, things like turn and change, and honestly, even like people we work with, things are changing all the time. So creating time and effort to make this product has been a lot and will continue. The website is up, lettersleftsaid.com. You can sign up and even have your email there if we're not fully released yet, but we plan on releasing end of this year. And so as things come along, we'll have like different features, and we love new ideas and new updates. So for me specifically, it matters a lot to me that it's usable and actually sustainable. So getting that feedback early on, if anyone is interested, is such a big deal, because I will make sure that it gets built properly to have that and show it. And so maybe I'll have a blooper funny section that only can be opened on like in 2027 or in 2072.
I love it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you have any other questions for the lovely Christine over here?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for being on our show, and just thank you for the past 3 years of incredible friendship. Aww. Truly, you've been an absolute light in so many lives, including my own. So I just want to say thank you so much for that.
Thank you guys so much for having me. You guys are doing really, really amazing things on this podcast, and I'm so excited for people to know that they're connected to you.
All right, thank you.
I love that. But before we cut, I do have one question for you. I just wanted to make sure Matt was all thrown out. If you could give any, because Matt always throws these random ones in sometimes. I'm like, okay, I needed that. I just want to make sure. I want to give you space to say what you got to say.
Everything's good.
I would just like to ask you if you could give any words of advice with people dealing with grief or going through this rough time, what would you tell them?
You're not alone. I think that's always like a reminder for any stage in life. You're not alone in your grief. It may feel so heavy right now, and it never gets lighter, but you'll get better at carrying it. And because you're better at carrying it, you can start helping other people too. So remind yourself and your future self that what you're doing with right now, the work, It's going to help you 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And not only that, you'll be a light for other people without even realizing it. This is an experience that is universal.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Like Matt said, thank you so much for being here. It's truly been an honor getting to know you. You are definitely a light, and I look forward to knowing you in the future and seeing all that you accomplish.
Right back at you.
Aww. Thank you both. And thank you guys for listening. Until next time, I love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.